Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1057 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Oh man, oh my gosh, let the salt floweth. The number of people who took L's in this chapter far exceeds the people who did not. A part of me definitely enjoys the trollish chaos of all of it because the certainty with which some people spoke it's satisfying. Come on, you know that it is. On the other hand, reading this chapter, I'm filled with probably more criticisms than praises. I don't even want to do a review like this, right? Where I'm basically nitpicking everything that's going on in the conclusion of Wano. I dread this a lot. And that is pretty much what I feel overwhelmingly compelled to do. And I was never that big of a fan of Yamato joining the crew. Can we just talk about Yamato freely now? Now that we know that Yamato is not going to join with the Strats for the rest of the adventure, can we just be honest? Is that cool now? Asking for a friend who just doesn't want an entire mob of people to hate him. Nah, you guys know I'm just gonna do it anyway. Yeah, about Yamato. This is how I felt. Guys, I think I was incredibly excited to have a new Straw Hat crew member because who doesn't? Now, it's always a high moment, but everything needs to be taken with perspective in comparison to other things that we've gotten. Yamato as the next Nakama, in comparison to every previous Nakama from Jinbei to Brook and everybody, Frankie, right? I was definitely least excited for Yamato than everyone previously. But that does not mean that I was not excited. And it also does not mean that I hate Yamato. I would say that given the people that could have joined, Yamato excited me least. And there's some reasons for that feeling, I'm sure. But the biggest among all of these is that Yamato's gag, the Odin, she wants to be Odin, that got really old. At first it was really interesting because we were wondering if it was social commentary or what it would amount to, and then the conversation became really toxic, which is part of the reason I think that this bled over into my feeling about Yamato in general. I don't even want to talk about Yamato because the discourse jaded me. This is not necessarily Oda or Hor's fault, but I just wanted to acknowledge this. And it feels even worse now that we're here in the conclusion because I really don't think that it is going anywhere at all. Anywhere. Personally, with the realization that Yamato isn't going to continue to travel with the Strats, we're not going to get any more intel or insight into who she is. I think you need to acknowledge that Yamato wanting to be Odin or being Odin, it was a joke. And that's it. A joke that I feel like misses. In a way, maybe perhaps similar to Sanji, in that culturally, or philosophically, it doesn't jive with my beliefs. Just to explain or maybe over-explain a bit, when it's potential social commentary, it's very interesting. Or from a narrative standpoint, where this might take Yamato's character, it's interesting. But I don't ever think that it was funny. And it's not funny because it doesn't jive with my personal beliefs. It is in fact annoying that Yamato wants to be Odin and not the best version of Yamato. Feels like the wrong message. In hindsight, I would speculate that Oda thought it was a good plan to create this intrigue about the character of Yamato, what their design would be, who they are, claiming to be Odin. All of this was very interesting at the time. By the end, though, you're not left with any payoff for it. It's like a story with an incredible intro and a mediocre conclusion. So the hook is there, but you're left dissatisfied. But as we continued throughout Wano with Yamato, there didn't seem to be any progression towards Yamato being Odin. And when that reality set in for me, I think that Yamato fell a few pegs. Not in terms of how likely I thought it was for her to be a crewmate, but in terms of how much I liked her in comparison to the other candidates. So I would say that overall, I'm not disappointed that she didn't join. I wasn't specifically invested here, and as we can see with this chapter, there's still some hope that we do get a new Nakama, so I'm actually more excited than I was. tentatively excited, but we'll talk about this a little bit later. In some respects, outside of the story itself or anything that you could discuss from it, I feel like a little humility actually probably served the community well. I think that we can all agree that the Yamato stands here were a little out of line, trying to pretend like this wasn't a discussion. You got pantsed. I don't mean to kick people when they're already down, but yeah, take that, Yamato stands. Do better. But now we've sort of established my feelings about Yamato. I want to talk more objectively about, or as objectively as possible, about what's going on now and how I think you should feel. I do this often where I tell you how to think. I try not to do that, at least be cognizant of it when I'm trying to do it, but you know. Anyway, what we have here is we have a Vivi situation. A lot of you weren't, including myself, weren't reading weekly when Vivi was a Straw Hat potential Nakama, someone who would continue with the Straw Hats on their journey. And so now you know, if you were a Yamato stan, now you know probably how Vivi fans felt. It's not the same. I want to make that clear, it's not the same. And the reason it's not the same is because Oda poured so much more love into Vivi. First off, she wasn't introduced randomly at the middle end of an arc and didn't have an unsatisfying conclusion, or didn't, you'll notice here, right, that the person that Oda really hyped up with the farewell was Momonosuke, not Yamato. Yamato was sort of shrugged off at the beginning of the chapter, no, we off-screened this, talked about it, we're good now, I'm just gonna stay here, right? So it's a little bit disrespectful from Oda himself towards Yamato. If you do compare Yamato to Vivi as a massive fake-out where the entire community was convinced somebody would join because Oda intended for that feeling to exist, I think that I don't have to explain how Vivi was pretty much superior in every way, aside from potentially power scaling or ability to fight. That's what I mean when I say that Vivi was shown more love. And I think that it's a casualty of Oda wanting to speed the story up. Speed the story up in combination with there being too many characters. The story cannot be very fast when you have a lot of characters, or it can be, but you end up in situations like this where the community is rattling. It's like adding many point of views or POV characters to a fantasy story. I know everybody hasn't read one, but when there's one POV character, the story tends to be shorter. When you add 5 or 6, it balloons into mega colossal stories. The same thing is true in manga, and I think Oda intuitively knows this, which is why arcs balloon. But if he is really trying to hurry up, these two things do not work. At least for many readers. You need to cut characters. But anyway, with this being said, I really understand the large number of fans who are disappointed in some way or another with this. It is a recipe for disappointment. It is not fans' fault. It is the author's fault when you promise big and you under-deliver. A new Straw Hat is promising big, and Oda absolutely made that promise. If not because generally we felt like it was time for one, but because Yamato, that was entirely the point of it, of her, to be a red herring. To create the feeling within the fans that a new Straw Hat is definitely coming. As a side note, which we are not going to get into entirely, there are both good and bad red herrings in my opinion, or there's ways to do red herrings better. And I think this was not the way I would recommend. And it mainly comes down to what else the red herring is doing for the story, aside from being a dead end. So when you create this expectation, you have to meet the bar or exceed it. And even with Vivi back in Alabasta, Oda did something I think really incredible with her, but still understood that, hey, fans aren't going to be satisfied unless I give them what I promised that I would give them, a new Nakama. Not the one that they thought, though. Enter Robin. That is an example I would hold up as exceeding the bar, setting this expectation. People were really satisfied with Vivi. Vivi got a satisfying conclusion, and then there's a twist, excitement, because we get somebody new who is also really interesting. It's a case where everybody wins. Another example where Oda did this, in my opinion, very masterfully was in Water 7. I've been told, again, I wasn't reading weekly at the time of Water 7 and Enies Lobby, and I felt this actually as I was watching it at the time. There was a really strong case for Polly instead of Frankie, and the fandom was convinced at the time that Polly would be the one joining. But again, I wasn't there, but in retrospect, you can see like Frankie is just a straight up upgrade. Again, how to exceed the bar, while keeping with your promise that the Strats came to Water 7 because they needed a shipwright, a new Nakama. But this is just talking generally. Again, I would like to compare this to Vivi more so, and Oda substituted or twisted Vivi into Robin. I want to feel really strongly that in the next chapter, we'll have Enter Carrot. Again, we got to keep in mind though that this is a theory I can make, in my opinion. It's very persuasive to me, a great argument for why Carrot should join, her motivations, how she would fit in on the crew, her role, everything. I think that from very early on, back when everybody thought Carrot would join, that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's in terms of all the things necessary for Carrot to join. I'm not going to get into all of it, but all of that really fell to the wayside simply because of how Carrot was treated in Wano. But even with all of these arguments, I can't be 100% confident because overall, the end of this arc, I mean, the pervasive feeling that I have is more than anything Oda is trying to move on. And if that's the case, he may have decided that the Strats don't need any more Straw Hats. So I think that this is where I stand right now. I think that for Oda to have promised a new Straw Hat, and what we got is, it leads to disappointment. Not for everybody, you don't have to be disappointed, but that is how you create that feeling when you make big promises and then you undercut it all. So if we don't get another Straw Hat, I won't look at this arc very favorably. At the same time, I recognize that maybe Oda realized that he has too many characters and it would actually suit the story more to not give us a new Nakama. In that case, I would have never made that promise. I would have given the sense that after Jinbei, the crew is complete and then everybody would be satisfied. So that's what I would have chosen to do. But if we don't get Carrot in the next chapter, there will be a silver lining. And in another respect, you can look at this a lot like Dressrosa. Again, where a lot of people expected a new Straw Hat. We were introduced to all these various random characters and followed their fights, which at the time as we were reading was like, why are we spending all this time with Hyrogen and Blue Gilly instead of Sanji? That's what people wanted. They wanted more of the actual Straw Hats, not these other people. Of course, it came together at the end with the introduction of the Grand Fleet, which was really cool. It felt like such a milestone for the Strat Pirates to have a fleet. And it also appears as if this is part of Oda's logic as well, especially if Carrot doesn't join, Carrot becomes leader of Zou. So we have essentially two kingdoms which joined the Straw Hats at the same time, and Oda did give that a bit of shine. The big moment of this chapter was Luffy giving Momonosuke the flag. That was intended to be the hype look. The Straw Hat Pirates are even more powerful and cool and in control than they were prior. That's one of the things that we should have enjoyed from this chapter, and this is all about essentially Strike Crew members or fleet members who are leaders of entire kingdoms. So as Carrot is now set up to be the leader of Zou, I could see how that sort of folds into the moment that we got for Momonosuke, even though we didn't get the same moment for Carrot, which is either disrespectful or suspect. But I will just say that from my personal experience, this idea of Luffy giving Momonosuke the flag and kingdoms as part of the Strats, it's not as impactful as the Grand Fleet was or as actual Nakama are, simply because it's something that I take for granted, because I feel as if the Strats have already accomplished this throughout their entire journey. Alabasta and Dressrosa and Fishman Island, all of those countries, I mean, even if they didn't get a flag, basically they do. So it was a big moment that felt less big because we already knew that the Straw Hats were doing this. In comparison, not everybody thought that the Strats would have a legitimate grand fleet. I think at the time of Dressrosa, people just assumed that the Strats would have a bunch of allies, not legitimate subordinates. But anyway, let's just talk more generally about the chapter. I really liked that Momonosuke and Kinemon got mad at the disrespect that Luffy showed them. I think that it was kind of contrived. Like, the Strats were getting ready to leave, but they had the flag, so were they just gonna sit there on their ship for Momonosuke and Kinemon to return? Some of that is just kind of, it's just creating a moment that only exists because Luffy didn't talk to them, which, why wouldn't he have? Luffy trying to be all dramatic and stuff. You thought I was gonna leave without saying goodbye. Here's your flag. Got him. But still, I really enjoyed it. But I am curious about the official translation a little bit, because obviously eventually Momo breaks down and he cries, but this line from the unofficial translation just, man, it really missed for me, and it's so unfortunate. Where Momo said, "Please don't leave, I'll be so lonely." Like, why would you be lonely when you have all of your retainers and your friends from your entire life here with you? A part of me wants to overanalyze this, like, Momonosuke doesn't feel like these people treat him like a friend. They treat him like their liege, like their ruler, and what he wants is friends. Which actually, if you explain it this way, is really sad. And it makes me want him to have actually traveled with the crew. But yeah, despite these nitpicks, all of this I did generally enjoy for Momonosuke. I think that Momonosuke got the love that he needed to, and he really has since the conclusion of the fight with Kaido, so Oda definitely made sure to do Momonosuke right. It was definitely mildly satisfying that Oda chose for Momonosuke to get this moment while Yamato is off in the background and Carrot's not here. Mainly because everybody hated that Momonosuke for Straw Hat theory. But now you have to recognize that if you really want to consider Yamato to be a Straw Hat, you gotta do it for Momonosuke too. So, if you want to take that W, I'm taking mine. Regardless of whether Oda intended this or not, after this chapter, I will probably forever and always consider Momonosuke to be more of a Straw Hat than Yamato. Momonosuke, without question, has achieved VV status. Because, Momonosuke was actually a part of the crew for some period of time. But the actual best part of the chapter for me was the interaction of Law, Kid, and Luffy. That's the kind of stuff I live for. Pretty much any time that's ever happened ever, I've loved the moment. And this chapter was no different. Just the rivalry, camaraderie is just, I don't know, something about that really works. With both Kid and Law having obtained poneglyphs, I'm a little bit unsure about Kid, but definitely for Law, I just kind of expect that Law's going to continue on his own adventure, and we're going to meet him again in the final battle around Laugh Tale. And when that happens, what he will do, I haven't lost any interest for Law whatsoever. I still think that there's a lot left for him in the story. And Oda again promised that in this chapter, reiterated this promise when Law pardoned and said, by the way, next time that we meet, we're not allies anymore. And the last thing that happened from the chapter was the end where we got pretty much a close to Act 3 of Wano. There was narration, a theater play about the Kozuki versus the Kurozumi. And the wording, at least in the fan translation, was pretty brutal. The thing that Oda really liked, the wordplay, was that Odin was born to boil, right? So boiling Odin brings out, it becomes what it should be once it boils. Oda flipped this with the Kurozumi. Kurozumi means charcoal, so Kurozumi became what it was always meant to be once it burns. Which just straight up does not feel like the right messaging. When Odin boiled, he filled the country of Wano with hope. He became the best version of himself after boiling, and this is very positive, right? Well, the Kurozumi became the best version of themselves when they burned. How does this affect Wano? Well, it freed them from oppression. Sort of, ignoring the role Kaido played. It feels like we've gone backwards to the mindset that the Kurozumi must die. They're just inherently bad people. I'm not sure if Oda meant it this way, but this definitely was the impression that was created from reading the fan translation. The other half of this is probably just like destiny, right? Like, wow, the Odin, his name is Odin, right? So it's destiny for Odin to boil. It's destiny for charcoal to burn. Momonosuke means peach. I guess you could go further. It's destiny for peaches to grow, or Tama means egg. So it's destiny for Tama to hatch. What's some others that we could do here? Toko. Toko can mean recovery, so it's destiny for Toko to heal. I think probably more so Oda liked the wordplay. But you could take this further if you wanted to. Like almost a dark ending to this arc that didn't provide salvation for the opponents that the Straw Hats and allies were fighting against. Even in a situation like Fishman Island with Hody Jones, the whole point was to create an environment after he's defeated so that another person like him wouldn't be created. But we're not really getting the same messaging here. So if another Kurozumi happens to exist in Wano, we would just assume that, they would they would put them at the stake to burn, because that's all they're good for. Or maybe even worse than this, the genocide of the Kurozumi is complete, so they don't have to worry about that anymore. I.e., the message here is that if you want to solve a long-standing problem between two rival groups, just kill all of the other group. Then they can't fight you. Anyway, if you can't tell, I'm really ready to move on from Wano. I've been pretty outspoken. I'm not a huge fan of the ending. I think that it's one of the worst in One Piece, and this includes smaller arcs that people like less. I think that the endings, regardless of how I felt during the arc, I think Wano during the arc was incredible, but the end just missed for me. But I have hope that, and basically my conspiracy theory is that Oda finally ran into the problem of having too many characters. Perhaps he edited some things or his plans for the end of the arc. We will probably never know, but I just feel like at some point in time there was a drastic shift where the pacing of the story just went through the roof, and it coincides with Oda reaffirming and restating that he intends on ending the story in a few years. So my hope is that this unprecedented break that we had prior was really necessary, and it helped Oda to better construct the next arc so that he doesn't run into the same problems. And if anybody can do it, he can. Anyway, that's all I have to say today. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Click the bell, subscribe, be notified, join the squad. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.